Welcome to the Quick Bite Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Klinger. Today, I have a very special guest. I'm very honored to have Cheri Garcia, the founder of Cornbread Hustle and Junk Hustlers. And she's also an advocate for second chances and recovery, a keynote speaker. The Lord has blessed Cheri in many, many ways. Her story is quite remarkable to hear what she has gone from, the test to the testimony, as you will, and impacting literally thousands of lives in this world. And so, Cheri, it's quite an honor to have you on the Quick Bite Podcast.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. And yes, the test to the testimony. But one thing I keep learning is I've never arrived. So there's new testimonies to be in store. That's for sure. I'm working through one right now as we speak.
Yes, and that's that journey of life, honestly. And you think you're at the mountaintop, and then, the Lord puts another test in your path. And it's always working for our good. I was just with another podcast episode yesterday we were recording, and it was about Romans 8:28 and how God works all things together for good for those that love him. So I know the Lord will see you through that one, just like he's seen you through everything else you've been through on this journey. If you don't mind, Cheri, and your story is so powerful, and I know it's going to encourage a lot of people, and you've told this story many, many times. So thank you for honoring us and our audience with it one more time. If you would just share your testimony, would you, and just share your journey and where you were and where you are and where you're going.
Yes, absolutely. In Romans 8:28, that's my favorite scripture. When I was in roller derby, my number was 828 because of that. So thank you for opening up this podcast with that scripture. But my journey began when I was born, but my journey of really going through some tough times began in high school. And I decided to try a drug called meth. It was appealing to me because I was a cheerleader at the time, and to hear that it would give me energy and make me lose weight was something I was very interested in. I did end up, unfortunately, selling drugs to a family member. And so I went from being on the cheerleading team, making decent grades, to literally becoming a drug dealer. And that's when my entrepreneurial journey began, not just with the drugs, but that's when I first started a company. It was a photography studio, and I was just trying to make a living because I was growing up too fast. And looking back, that's what caused a lot of my pain. And that's where a lot of the trauma came from, being at a young age and being too independent too quickly and codependent at that, especially because of selling drugs to a family member. And so I did end up, and I don't like using this term, but I'm going to use it. I picked myself up by the bootstraps. So I didn't go to a 12-step program. I didn't go to rehab. I just got sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I quit using meth. And what I did wrong at the time is I filled my void, those highs and lows and that chaos, with entrepreneurship and seeking validation from other people. So at that time, I didn't seek the Lord. I didn't find my worthiness and validation from Jesus Christ. I searched it from the world. So that worked until it didn't. I got a job in the newsroom, even though people said there's no way you're going to get a job in the newsroom. You don't have a college degree. Like, that's literally the prerequisite of a pretty girl getting out of high school that wants to be on TV. Like, you got to start there, sweetheart. But I got really creative. And after 4 years of trying to get my foot in the door, I sent a pizza with my resume face down that said, if you hire me, I will deliver. So I got past that barrier. I got my foot in the door in Market 5. I worked at CBS 11, and I loved it. It was more chaos. It was more highs and lows. It was more seeking validation from the world. We're the first on the scene. We're the ones that know everything that's going to happen before everybody else. And I just felt I was very proud of what I had accomplished, but it became my identity. And I started working. I helped Mark Cuban. He allowed me to have an internship, so to speak, even though, again, I didn't go to college, but I paved my own way. And so I learned how to do PR and marketing by really honing in on my skills and working with his Shark Tank companies. And what I was doing, though, was filling myself up with alcohol. while pouring into other people. I felt like, okay, I had learned how to get off meth and become successful. So let me go into prison and start helping people do the same. And sadly, again, looking back, that's why Romans 8:28 is such a powerful scripture for me, because if I don't lean on that scripture, I'll get a bunch of shame and I'll feel undeserving to be where I'm at today. Because looking back, I tried to duplicate what worked for me at the time. I went into prison. I'm like, hey, if you be successful, it'll fix everything. And so now my 12-week starting over program, the first course is literally called Success Won't Fix You. I had it all wrong. And so I'm in prison and I'm pouring into other people. I'm teaching them how to create a business plan. I had already invented a product. Again, all the stuff that I learned from working with Mark Cuban, I was going in and teaching these guys. And they get out of prison and they started asking me like, okay, what do I do now? Where do I start? And that's when I just told them like, hey, I didn't have a college degree. The craziest thing, Brian, is that I literally, I did not see any barriers for these people coming out of prison. I just didn't, because everyone told me I had all these barriers going into the newsroom. So I was like, okay, if I was told I had all those barriers, how do these people have barriers? So I was like, let's just get creative. Let's just Google where you want to work and I'll pick up the phone and call. And so it ended up working. People were getting jobs. But the problem was I was not a good leader. While I helped them in their life and I was what they needed at the time, and I'm still friends with all of them, and some of them have 6-figure jobs today, I wasn't sober. I was drinking alcohol. I still hadn't faced any of my traumas. I still hadn't walked the walk. So as the CEO of Cornbread Hustle, the staffing agency that helps people coming out of prison, I get a DWI. Not a good look. But I convinced myself that everybody drinks and drives. I just happened to get caught and I have a hard job and it is what it is. I convinced myself of that and justified it as long as I could, until on Christmas Day of 2018, I woke up and decided to give myself the gift of sobriety. I got sick and tired once again. I got sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that's when that was the prerequisite I really needed. It wasn't college. It wasn't a certain opportunity. It was sobriety and the Lord. And so once I got sobriety and the Lord, that's when I was able to really run a multi-million-dollar. It wasn't even multi-million before I got sober. It was the whole first year of my sobriety. I was in that humbling in between. That's what I like to call it, the humbling in between, where I wasn't ready to live the new life, but I wasn't letting go of my old life, but I didn't want the old life anymore. So that first year of sobriety, I was getting my car repoed. I had a negative bank account. Everything sucked. It wasn't until I turned 1 year sober that I made my first 6 figures as an entrepreneur, and then made my first 7 figures as an entrepreneur. And I'll tell you, it's, I'm in a humbling in between right now. You know, I'm really good at being transparent. I'm really good at being vulnerable, but I've recognized that I haven't been very authentic. And what I mean by that is I've been continuing this journey of trying to earn happiness. And I finally worn myself out. And so I'm right now, as we speak, I'm just now coming out of another test and going into testimony of understanding that God's grace is sufficient. And I do deserve happiness. It's not even about deserve or not deserve. None of us deserve anything, air quotes. But, yeah, I'm at a point now where I want to freely accept God's grace and stop earning it. So that's my story.
Cheri, everything you said at the foundation of your journey really comes back to worth, and really knowing that, you know, and look, I've struggled with that too. You know, I was thrust into a position of leadership at a young age and I felt completely unworthy of it. From the time I was a kid, I was like this person that everybody looked to for the answers when it came to sports and baseball, and you kind of naturally gravitate towards things. But I was trying to do things in my own power. I was trying to solve things under my own strength. And I also had turned to alcohol. I was selling beer out of the trunk of my car in high school because I worked at a golf course and the pros would just give us, I won't name the course, but it's still around, but they would give us the cans of beer after the tournaments were over and say, throw it away or do whatever you want with it. And I started my entrepreneurial journey learning how to selling beer out of the trunk of my car. And, got down this spiral. And I was, I grew up going to church. My parent, very involved, but I had not come to a place in my own life, Cheri, where I had surrendered, like truly surrendered, that said, Lord, I'm really just going to rest in your grace. And that was hard because I have always found, like in business and sales and marketing, I've always done really well and been very blessed. But it was that constant wrestling of I'm unworthy, but yet people say, and you talk about validation from others. You talk about wanting approval of others. I was almost feeding off of that. And then to the point of, well, if they're not the best, I must be the worst. And these extremes, so it's these highs and lows. But as I've gone on this journey with Christ, I'm learning just as you. I mean, I literally I'm resonating so much of what you said. And I think a lot of people will, but we tend to hide it though. We want to keep it masked. We want to make everyone think we've got it all figured out. And I do love your transparency especially I follow you on LinkedIn. You share those stories where you talk about, hey, I'm afraid. I'm jumping into the deep end of this new venture and I don't have it figured out, but I'm jumping in. And, I think there's real strength in that and there's real grace in that, but God always provides. Romans 8:28 is actually my favorite verse in the Bible too. And the gentleman I had on, Joshua Liggins from Inspire Brands, they own Buffalo Wild Wings and Dunkin' Donuts, Arby's, Jimmy John's, Sonic, and Baskin Robbins. He loves that verse. I mean, and to hear his testimony. So, Cheri, the thing I love about what you just shared is that now you're taking your learnings and God has given you a platform where you have hundreds of thousands of followers out on social. You're a light and you're shining truth and giving hope to people. And I know that, when God places you in those positions, he's doing it for a reason. You may not always think you're worthy of that call, but Moses felt the same way. When he went before the Pharaoh, he said, who am I to speak before this person? Lord, you're going to have to give me the words. And I have found that to be true in many cases with my own life to this day. And I'm sure you do the same. So, thank you for sharing that. I need to ask you, go through some of these questions here. I ask everyone the same 10. So, but keeping it through the vein of what you just shared, as you've been on this journey, what's the best piece of business advice that you've ever received?
So the best piece of business advice. This isn't, I think somebody gave me this advice more of personally, but I apply it for business more than anything. And it's don't take advice from people whose shoes you don't want to live in. And that sounds like really cliche and vague, but when you think about it, most of the times that, again, I had a problem with validation seeking, and people will project when they're giving you advice. It's easy come, easy go. I think Mark Cuban said it before. He said, the people giving you advice don't have to live with the consequences. And so there's been many times, especially you said I have hundreds of thousands of followers. If you can only imagine the amount of advice I'm getting, unsolicited advice all the time. And as a former people pleaser and somebody seeking validation from the world, that was something that I had to work on a lot. And there were many times that people whose shoes I wanted to live in, like literal women who sold staffing agencies living their best lives, would tell me something, but I wouldn't listen because it wasn't what I wanted to do and it wasn't what I wanted to hear. And it was going to cause me to have a lot of patience and a lot of determination and grit. However, this guy that is an employee somewhere, and look, sometimes I want to be an employee. So there's nothing wrong with being an employee, but that's not where I'm trying to go. I'm trying to be an employer, is telling me what I should do because it sounded better and it seemed easier. I'd take that advice. And every single time I'd go back to my mentor and being like, why didn't you beat me over the head? Why didn't you tell me, well, Cheri, because you listened to God and I didn't want to get in the way of God's plans for you. And I'm like, well, no, I didn't listen to God. I listened to that guy up the street.
That is brilliant, and there's another Mark Cuban saying that I love where he says, I like to surround myself with people that don't stress me out. I keep the ones that don't cause me stress. And I've used that a few times. Love Mark Cuban, Shark Tank, and Kevin O'Leary's actually part of our ventures group here at Comcast, NBC Universal, and gives advisement to some of the entrepreneurs and I'm an advisor to a lot of startups. But that's a brilliant saying that Mark gave, because you're right. There's a lot of people that want to, chirp at you on the sidelines. And again, I see it too sometimes. And I can only imagine, because it's exponentially larger in your case, and how you deal with that. And gosh, Cheri, I mean, like, I feel like I'm looking in a mirror talking to you, because that was my real weakness as a people pleaser. And I felt like, I was always worried about what everybody else thought of me in that journey until, I'm a recovering people pleaser as well. And saying no to people is really hard for me, to the point of I would just overextend myself to the point of total exhaustion, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally. And that is one thing, even Jesus took naps on the boat. Even Jesus had to get away quietly. So thank you for sharing that. What do you think the top three qualities, or it doesn't have to be three, it could be two or one. What's a key core of qualities that you think a great leader should have?
So, transparency. I will say that our core values at Cornbread Hustle is empowerment. You can't really be a great leader without empowering others. Accountability. You can't be a great leader if you're not accepting accountability. A lot of times, leaders will blame, and yes, we don't have a lot of control over the economy and circumstances. The last 2 years have been disastrous for staffing agencies, and there's not much staffing agencies can do about the economy. But there is a lot that we can do as leaders and with our efforts, and if we're being a wise steward of the funds that we have left, so we're not having to make decisions that affect people's lives. So I think accountability, I'm always, at the end of the day, even if somebody in my company messes up, I take accountability as the leader to not be more proactive, to make sure that, or to have more, risk mitigation, basically. Why didn't I have a process in place to minimize the risk for this? And then lastly, empowerment, accountability, transparency. Transparency is a real big one. I'm very transparent with all of my employees about the money and how we're spending it. And even though at the end of the day, I'm the employer and I'm using air quotes, it's not their business. I make it their business. Not only because I want them to understand where the business is at, but I also don't want to be in this alone. And I want them to know, what's happening. And so the one thing that we don't have in our core values, and like I said, I'm in the middle of that tested testimony. I think authenticity is really important. And like I told you, it's very easy to wear a mask of vulnerability and transparency. And it's a good way to trick people into making them think you're authentic, right? And I tricked myself even. So there's just ways that I haven't even been authentic. And the reason why that affects me as a leader is because if I'm unhappy, nobody wants to be around an unhappy, self-sacrificing leader. And so if I want to wear a hot pink suit in prison because I feel like it, I need to do that instead of wearing a work uniform every single day because I am self-sacrificing because I don't want to be too distracting or I want to blend in. And so I'm right now on that journey of living fully in my authenticity. And, cause I don't know if, well, even if you were in a 12-step program, we're not really supposed to say if we are, but I will tell you that the program of recovery that I work, resentment is what keeps us the most sick. And so as a leader, it's very important for me to be authentic, even though I failed at that. It's going to be important for me to be authentic in the future because if I'm sick with resentment, I won't be a very good leader.
Wow. That is so true. And I think of that authenticity, and that's a real struggle for a lot of people. I mean, it really is. and I know on my own journey, I just shared, I mean, just give a open testimony here publicly. So I battled with anxiety, and that was based out of performance and fear, the perfectionist mindset and things like that, like I alluded to earlier. And I spoke at the Giving Kitchen, which is a nonprofit based out of Atlanta. I'm now on the board of directors. I spoke at their inspirational kickoff meeting. It was an all hands employee meeting starting off the new year. And they asked me to come in and give them some inspiration, right? And tell these stories. And so I ended up opening up because one of the things they provide support in to people in the restaurant and food service industry is mental health. And they asked me a question, and it kind of took me off guard a little bit. And they asked me about mental health. And what is your take on that? Have you had any journeys yourself that you can relate to? And I just opened up about having panic attacks and anxiousness and things that just hit me out of nowhere because I was thrust into this position of senior leadership at a very young age with a ton of responsibility and carrying, big budgets and sales numbers and pressures. And I was, at the time, had a young family, a stay at home, wife with, raising young kids. Everybody was depending on me. And while I might have projected I had it all together, I was getting crushed on the inside with pressure. And I opened up about that. And I think it's going to be a lifelong journey for me, Cheri. I don't think once you start having anxiousness or panic attacks and it kind of sets in, and I've had to go on a journey myself of, growing in my faith and depending on God and surrendering. And also I tried the therapies and I went to the counselors and the drugs they hand you, and none of it worked. None of it worked for me. It wasn't until I learned that acceptance, and it actually became a crutch with mental health where it became who I was. It's like this thing that I didn't want to let go. I almost looked at it like a superpower, having anxiety, because it revved me up and it gave me cortisol and it gave me adrenaline and that spark. And what people thought was my energy was actually anxiousness that I was masking as energy. So the thing that, you end up thinking is out for your bad actually ended up being used for good, Romans 8:28. But now I'm telling this story and starting to get comfortable with opening up. And that started for the first time last week. I've never told this story publicly. Now I'm telling it for the second time publicly, that this guy that people look at as this, big sales leader and all this, in a Fortune 29 generating billions of dollars in revenue. Yes, I have struggles too, but it takes courage, I think, to do that. And then that, I think God honors your vulnerability. So, again, sorry, I'm just over here having my own session with you, but I'm relating to so much of what you're saying, Cheri. And I think it's going to help a lot of people. So when it comes to becoming a leader, and I kind of want to weave this in, becoming a leader and faith. Questions really 3 and 4 should kind of come together, I think, in this one. How does someone aspire to leadership or grow into leadership? And that role of faith plays in that.
So at the end of the day, a business owner, my belief is that is how we kingdom build. At our company, me and one of my recruiters, we always, especially when we're having bad days, especially when the money isn't good, we remind ourselves that we work for God. We don't work for our clients. She doesn't work for me even. She'll remind me all the time that she doesn't work for me. She works for God. And not in a rude way. It's whenever I'm actually feeling like a failure and I'm sharing with her my fears about business. She's like, look, I don't work for you. I work for God. It's all going to work out. I'm like, wow, what a relief. Thank God I have an employee that feels that way. What I do personally, so I'm part of a lot of different groups and I go to different seminars where they're helping business owners instill their faith in the workplace and bring faith to the marketplace. I actually go to those things because I'm like, I have a lot of God in my business. I'm trying to instill more business and being a wise steward. But I would suggest, I am part of an organization called C12, and it's where every single month, it's kind of like EO. I don't know if you've heard of Entrepreneurs Organization, but it's every single month, a forum of 12 other business owners, which you meet with every single month for an entire day, and you kind of poke holes in each other's businesses and remind each other what's important. And we look at our strategies from a kingdom building mindset or viewpoint, I should say. Lens is the word I'm looking for. And so I just try to do a lot of those things. There is a conference coming up I think it's in April in Dallas. It's a C12. It is a C12 conference of all the people all over the world that are coming together for a big conference. So I just try to participate in those things to, it's not even the content that I need, because I get my content every morning from the Word and every evening. It's the community. And you said it earlier, you don't want to surround yourself with people who stress you out. Birds of a feather flock together. You're the average of your 5 closest friends. You've heard all the sayings. They're cliche, but it's true. If you're a big fish in a little pond, what's it matter that you're reigning over such a little pond? I'd rather be a little fish in a big pond. And that I am that in C12. Like sometimes I wonder if they're going to kick me out because they're like, okay, this girl, is she building a business or is she running a charity? Because we can't tell. But yeah, I like surrounding myself with people who also are running businesses, who are also Christian. Also, we attract those kind of clients. It's helpful when the clients that come to us, they're coming because they want to kingdom build and they want to pave the way for somebody who needs a second chance, and they see the value of a person who has the skills they need and willing to pay for it, as opposed to our clients. And we'll take them all because we're trying to help people get jobs. But we also have clients that come to us from more of a desperate standpoint because they need workers. And sometimes we have to do a lot of educating and empathy training around like, hey, these are people too. They're not just labor that you can treat badly and get for cheaper, which is terrible that we have to even teach that. But we see it as an honor and a privilege, and we never make a client feel bad. We always have open discussions, and just like I can't believe God allowed me to be in prisons and allowed me to start this company 10 years ago when I wasn't even sober yet. So I had no business doing it. So I'm not in a position to judge a company that has no business doing it, because just like I wasn't ready to be a leader, but God still used me 10 years ago, the companies that we work with, if they're not ready, they'll become ready, and the whole Romans 8:28 thing will reveal itself.
Quick Bite Podcast is proud to shine a spotlight on Giving Kitchen, an incredible nonprofit serving the food service community in times of crisis. From unexpected medical emergencies to natural disasters, Giving Kitchen steps in when life takes an unexpected turn. To learn how you can help support those who serve us every day, visit givingkitchen.org. And while you're at it, subscribe to the Quick Bite Podcast, where leadership meets heart, and join us in making a difference, one episode at a time. Quick Bite Podcast. Bite-sized conversations, big-time impact.